And we welcome you back to the Fighting Saints Report. Jack Milewski, joined by head coach Oliver David here, wrapping up the 2018-2019 season. And coach, a couple days off now since the end of the season to step back and look at all 62 regular season games and then the playoffs. And it is kind of crazy to think that just 2 weeks ago the playoffs were starting for the team, and it's already been about 4 days since the team was eliminated in Game 4 by Muskegon. But when you look back at the crazy run from driving overnight after the regular season finale in Waterloo, beating Youngstown in 2 games, and then pushing Muskegon to 4 games, what are your immediate thoughts of the playoffs and the way the team performed in those 6 games?
I thought we had a very successful, quick postseason. The USHL is not set up for postseason play or really playoff hockey. Obviously, when the first round is best of 3 and every round is best of 5 from there. For instance, in the Canadian leagues, in all the Canadian leagues, no matter the level, even Junior B, for instance, the playoffs are all best of 7 series, 4 rounds. So USHL development model is not conducive with a long playoff situation, and we found ourselves in the toughest spot in that equation, as you mentioned, getting on a bus after a game, going home and packing, getting on a bus 2 hours after a game, and going and starting our first round on the road, best of 3. So again, best of 3 in itself is a tough one. You lose that first game, it probably, I think you said the stat, it doesn't go in your favor most of the time. So to do that, drive 10 hours into the Eastern time zone, to have executed that very well, the boys to have legs in that series and execute the game plan to a T was awesome. And then it caught up to us. The adrenaline wore off, and we didn't have legs. We weren't our normal selves at all. Once we arrived at Muskegon for Game 1 and 2, we got home. They had played a couple games now, and their 7 days of rest sort of wore off, and we were able to stay with them for games 3 and 4 once we sort of got closer to a level playing field, if you will, in terms of rest and recovery. So we ended on a high note despite losing. We won a playoff game in the second round against the top team handily. Obviously, it was 5-1, and we lost the series 2-1 in terms of the final score. So they did a great job, but I feel we were right there despite the obstacles, and I think it speaks to our group, and we've got to figure out what it means to have basically a few games above 500 in the regular season, and people maybe doubt us, and people be down on us, and maybe even us be down on ourselves, and what's wrong? It doesn't look like the Dubuque of old, and on and on and on. I have something that I kind of, just to keep me in perspective, I try to avoid the noise as much as possible, but it still gets to you, and we still, your thoughts wander in all different directions. But ultimately, we end the season in the same spot as every team above us, other than 2 that are playing for the conference final, the first place team and the second place team. We beat the third place team, and the fourth place team lost in 2 games, and the the fourth place team, Cedar Rapids, ended the same day as us with the same exact record, and the 5th place team got swept. So here we are, the 6th place team, making it just as far as guys that won a few more regular season games. So what matters in the end? Probably not any of those results I talked about, but the players actually getting better. That's what we do here. This is a developmental league. It's awesome to win 45 games. It's awesome to feel like you're never going to lose in the regular season. But maybe the theme of hockey for this year, even in the NHL, is the top team in the regular season doesn't mean anything if we're going to judge ourselves on how we end results-wise in the postseason. But more importantly, we put a lot more stock into the development of players and coaches and the things that we do here behind the scenes. So we've been very successful in that way.
You mentioned, and before we get into some of that development, you mentioned maybe the doubt from just about anyone outside of the locker room going into that series in Youngstown. I mean, them being the 3 seed, you being the 6 is obvious, but the travel, the quick turnaround for your team, having to play 2 on the road in a place up until that Monday night where Dubuque had never won in the postseason. But then you come out and you not only beat them once, but you beat them twice, and you mentioned executing that game plan to a T. When you look at that, being able to make the playoffs again, being able to win at least one round in the playoffs, keeping those streaks alive. Obviously, those are stats. They're not the development you're talking about, but does that at least mean a little bit of something to you to continue all that playoff success that you've had?
Yeah, I think winning is development as well, and some of this might sound like a contradiction, but ultimately when you get a chance to play in the playoffs and you learn what it takes to execute a plan and you do what the team needs, not what you necessarily want in that moment, and you learn about playing the game and having situational awareness, learn from mistakes when you don't maneuver in the game with good situational awareness. That's all development. So for our guys to face all those obstacles, to go into a building we've never won a playoff game in the history of our club, at least since we've been back in 2010, no team has. And we've won Clark Cups, not us, me and you, but our club has. No one's won in that building. So, in fairness to anybody that doubted, which is basically everybody outside of our locker room, why wouldn't you doubt? Why wouldn't you look at some of the stats and who would have bet on us, other than emotionally being tied to us? Logically, there would be no reason to think we were going to be able to get it done. However, there are a lot of things that happen day to day. A lot of learning from losing. We faced a lot of adversity this year. We were not a top team. At times we looked like a top team. We very rarely got out-competed or outplayed, even in losses. And when you're coaching and you're a part of it every day, and you're monitoring sickness and injury and college visits and breaking up with girlfriends and schoolwork and family stuff outside of town, when you know the ins and outs of everyone's lives and you see the development every day and you know what the potential is, you can do some pretty cool things. And at the right time, we had Thiessen get real hot. Thiessen played his best hockey down the stretch. Everybody was on board. We had a really tight-knit team that built throughout the year, whether we won a game or lost a game. The guys loved each other. And you saw a lot of good as the season went along. In terms of, the depth of the roster and the depth at each position, those are all things we'll look at this week. Well, we've looked at all year, but obviously this week with the draft coming up. And naturally, we'll try to build a stronger team than we had this year at every position. That's our job, to try to do that. But other than that, we had a great team. It was one of the cooler experiences for me personally this year in my fifth year here in Dubuque out of the last 6, and looking forward to a 6th year.
You mentioned Thiessen being one of the players that stood out in the postseason. I think that was obvious to anyone that watched any of the postseason games. Looking from a developmental standpoint, something Jim and I were mentioning throughout our broadcast throughout the playoffs is it really looked like the Jacksons took that next step too in the last month, where they seemed to be more than willing to compete in those gritty areas. How much of that did you see in the last month, and how ready do you think they are to compete at this level again?
They're gonna be real ready, and they're gonna spend some time in the gym this summer. That's the expectation. And continue building some muscle. It's not so much, a matter of just putting on weight. They've got to build up their shoulders. They've got to build up their legs to withstand the onslaught that they're going to face next year. They're going to have a bounty on their head, like they did like they did this year, but even more so next year because they'll play more minutes and carry a bigger load. But like Michelli, for instance, this year, and he got shut down pretty good in the playoffs at times, or at least I should say he got marked, obviously. And Gaber took a heck of a lot of headshots, more than he needed to, and never backed down. So I mean the skilled players, the small skilled players, they have to take on a big burden, night in and night out in this league, and it's a real fast league, and things are coming at you. So they'll put some muscle on and be ready to go, and continue their development. The biggest thing for me that I noticed in their development the last month, is their poise with the puck and not getting knocked off of it. So they're only, Ty Jackson is 135 pounds, and Dylan, he might be 140 now actually, and Dylan is 152 pounds. So sometimes they do get knocked off the puck or fall down, and it looks like it was a pretty easy knockdown, but they became able to sort of absorb more often than not and kind of ride off guys, and they have really good edges in skating ability, and sort of roll off guys and keep the puck, and they were bursting in and out of kind of almost head-to-head contact. Like I would say, like a running back, knowing you're going through the hole, they just kept going for the gap and going in those areas and coming out of corners with pucks. So they obviously gain confidence. They'll continue to gain the strength to go with that confidence to be able to compete how they're capable of. And it's exciting that they're returning next year, as is Gaber. I mean, it's the first time since I've been here that we've returned three of our, I think it's top five. It might be, Michelli and maybe Sanchez was in there near him, but three top scorers in a season. And when you add Halliday, which maybe we'll talk about some of those other things, you're adding four guys with 30 plus points, returning 35 plus points, returning to your team. That's a really good starting point.
And not to mention, Jackson's and Gaber basically played on the same line the entire season, so they have that chemistry. Almost out of time here. One final question, though, and this might be a little too tough to do in such a one or two word segment, but when you look at this team, every team is unique in their own way. I think you mentioned that this team being unique in their own way also. But when you look at this team, what do you think you'll remember most about this 2018-19 squad as you take a step back?
Yeah, I think the three college guys was a really big deal preseason. Drafting them, recruiting them and drafting them, getting them here. You don't know what you're going to get with three guys coming. They did an excellent job, Greenway, Sanchez, Neeram. Being good role models, and being most importantly, just because of time, the simplest way to say it is they were good teammates, and they didn't have to be. They're coming from a different place, and maybe they could be a little disgruntled or a little bit egotistical, and they were really good teammates, so that worked out. The development of the Jacksons, as you mentioned, is outstanding, and hats off to those guys. They've really, really taken strides, and it's exciting that they're going to continue. I think we had, I would say, at defense, Kalen Taylor made the biggest strides. If we gave an award for most improved player, Kalen Taylor would have been it at the defensive side. And Thiessen really came through in the clutch there at the end. So ultimately, the shape of our roster and how it was built worked out. It's in the locker room, in building a culture and continuing to do what we want to do. This was a very easy season for me as a coach in terms of being able to sleep at night, not wondering what your players were doing away from the rink. So I'll remember most that there were a lot of smiles. Guys were happy to be here. Guys learned how to work. Guys developed, and we were led by a good group of older guys. And I'm looking forward to building a team and reloading for next year.
Well, as always, OD, thanks for the time. When we come back, Jim and I will go around the USHL and break down the conference finals.